All right, we can start. So, yeah, thanks for joining the second community call. Um, yeah, maybe other people will join in meanwhile because I think some are missing. But we're not too many people, so we can do individual introductions. I'll quickly start and then I'll choose another one and we go like that. So my name is Rakim. I'm the engineering manager in the Headlamp team inside Microsoft, and I'm the one of the maintainers of the project. Yeah, so next one I'll choose is Josh.
I'm Josh Akers. I work for Virginia Tech, a university in the US. We've been users, I guess, for a number of months now in production. We've had Headlamp, and we're very happy with it so far. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you. You want to choose the next one?
Sure, George.
Hello, my name is George. I'm from Hungary. I am a CTO of Ionix.io. We are providing opportunity to companies to build their own private clouds based on our technology called Cosistax. It's kind of a dedicated Kubernetes platform with a lot of whistles and bells, and probably that's all that you need to know about me.
You want to choose the next one to go?
Alexander.
Hi, my name is Oleg. I work on Headlamp since like April. And yeah, I do mostly front end. I'll show you some stuff today. And next, Santosh.
Hi folks, I'm Santosh. I work for Microsoft and I'm also part of the Headlamp team. And I've been working in Headlamp for almost 2 years. Yep, that's it from my side.
Thank you, everyone. So yeah, so for today, we have a demo planned by Oleg here about one of the upcoming features, which is a graph / map view. And we can go over the demo and then I can talk a little bit more about it. We can discuss things. Santosh here is also working on an upcoming feature, sorry, an upcoming plugin, probably less known, but it's being developed in the open anyway. But it's a backstage plugin. So I think that's going to be interesting too. And we got lots of stuff. Then I can, after the demos, I can also talk about the release plans. We can go over them and our presence in KubeCon North America coming up. And yeah, we can discuss, of course, anything that you folks think of introducing. So a bit loose, but we go like this. Oleg, you want to share your screen? I'm going to ask everybody just to mute. I'll mute myself as well, so we don't interfere with Oleg.
Okay, I'm going to show you the feature that we've been working on for some time. It's called a map. It's actually a graph, but we call it a map. And it's a new little page in the sidebar over here. And when you get here, you get an overview of all of your resources in the cluster in a graph view. So this allows you to like easily explore and like see the connections between different resources. Sometimes it's hard to like figure out what's connected to what, especially if it's just a list between different kinds of resources. So this will hopefully help with this and solve this problem. We have little groups here. For example, some resources are grouped by namespace. So we have like the kube system namespace, our default. And in each of those, we have groups are actually connected resources. So if I click on this core DNS group and expand it, we can see like a bunch of resources that are connected between each other. Most of these connections are like the owner references, but we also have others. This way you can get a quick view of connected resource. If you hover over it, it will display a little bit more information to get a quick look at a glance of a resource. So for example, I get a status of the pod, which container it runs, like IP address. And once I click on it, it opens a side panel with like just the usual details page that we show in other parts of the app. So this should be familiar to you. Another thing we can do here is, for example, group by instance. This will look in the labels of the resources and group them by the instance label. So for example, here I have Prometheus deployed. And if I go to Grafana, let's say I want to see like the secrets that are used in here. For example, I forgot the password for the Grafana. If I go to this little dropdown, which shows like which resources are shown. So like secrets, and there I see that this bot is this secret. I can open it and look it up. This view that you see, it's all live. So it means like every update will be streamed in. So let's say I'm gonna scale this deployment to 2. And we can watch as it hopefully scales it. So while it spins up, it shows you a little warning, which is like, if it's not successful, it will bring to attention. But once it's done, we can see it scaled to 2 instances. One thing that we're really excited about this is the ability to extend it. So the plugins will be able to enrich this map with its own data. So for example, we're working on a plugin that will show like network traffic between different pods. So you could imagine how that could be useful for observability. So we're planning on making like everything extensible here. So you can add like custom nodes, custom connections, custom details, like anything you want. So yeah, that's map in a nutshell.
Can you show the search?
Oh yeah, search. Well, search is really simple. I kind of reverted that feature. It just searches by name right now. So kind of works like you'd expect. We have a feature planned where you can do like search by like expressions, where you can write out like status equals to something, but that's still in the works.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Yeah, so Oleg already said part of what I wanted to mention. But yeah, so the original motivation for this in all disclosure is that we wanted to have a graph view for each resource. This is an issue we opened a while ago, and never really had the possibility of doing it. Other things got in the way, of course. Then we had a feature plan that was similar to that. So instead of having graph view per resource, the idea is that you have this just this global view, and the idea is to then make this into a observability view. That was supposed to be originally actually a plugin that brings you this view. But then Oleg here actually had the idea that, okay, why don't we add it to the core, and then the plugins, what they do is to enhance this view. And I think that's much more interesting actually, because otherwise we would be limited to, okay, you have the plugin, you have this view, but now you have this view and then you can make it more complex, right? With we have in our plans, like Oleg was saying, we have this sister project called Inspect the Gadget. So we're planning on adding some data from it. It uses BPF, so you can imagine that we can add lots of data about the processes and resources and stuff. from there. So, but it can be whatever other projects that develop a plugin for this. Cool. So we got a hand up from George.
Oh, looks nice. I think it's a great plugin. Thank you very much for demo. But I have some considerations like what if we have like 1,000 pods? It's probably possible scenario. Yeah, so it would be a mess. So is there any option how we can hide some elements or make them usable? And what if I want to use it in like from another end? So I know like the secret name and it's used by many different deployments. Could I somehow query this map and show all objects that are using this secret on one pane and panel? Yeah. And what about I don't know, network policies? Because it's a really very crucial thing to understand if some load is covered by network policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Like, how do you display a lot of data but not overwhelm the user? So in the case of 1,000 pods, by default, we don't like show all of them at once. So you would notice that if you have like replica set and a bunch of pods, it will be grouped like this. So you would see like a group with 1,000 here. I don't know, that would fit here. And then if you go into there, then it's going to show you all of them. Other part is this is all customizable. You can select exactly what you want to see. So if you don't want to see pods, no pods. Like everything that you see like on the left in our sidebar that we show, it's going to be on the map too. So like network policies, everything else, you can select, for example, only a secret and a pod, and then search for that secret, and that should show you where that secret is used.
Great. And what about custom resources like, I don't know, Helm releases from Flux, like network policies from Cilium? Because let's say custom resources like Flux could refer some like secrets, config maps, and other stuff. And I think it's not a basic functionality, right?
Yeah, so we don't support custom resources yet. I think this would be a great idea for a plugin for a map. So if you want to add different kinds of Flux nodes to the map, there could be a plugin for it, because we cannot possibly cover all possible custom resources here. But yeah, so, at this point, custom resources, I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, so there will be some kind of API and specifications that I can use like to write some plugin to the system, and it will allow to show custom resources on the map, right?
Yeah, the map is part of the core. So this is going to be shipped with the app itself. And then you can create plugins for it, extending it however you want.
Super.
Yeah, maybe in this first release. So we're planning this release for the next version, right? Maybe in this first release, we don't have the plugin API yet, right? Because first first Oleg had to work on actually making sure that this is scalable and is workable and all that. But the idea is to add that API. So it's basically, we're already disclosing that we want the plugins to control this, right? But essentially, it's not much different from the rest of how we created the plugin capabilities, which has been like, okay, is there a need for changing the sections in the main view? Maybe that's a basic one. So we add that. Then another need came up to replace the top cluster chooser button, for example, and we added that. So in this case, of course, there's already a few things we could add, but we first want to put this out and only then work on a good plugin API.
Oh,
Josh?
look, there is a very important thing that I forgot to mention. So basic Kubernetes allows only referring the resources in the same namespace, like ingress, secrets, config maps, and other stuff. Yeah. But if we will move to a custom resources like Helm releases or Flux, yeah, they could easily refer resources from a different namespaces. It's a typical approach when you put like Git repo in Flux system or Helm repo in Flux system and install Helm releases into tenant or user namespaces. Is there any support for such a cross namespace links on the map in the base system?
Yeah, like as long as you don't group it by namespace, you can have a group of items that could be across different namespaces. That should not be an issue.
Yeah, and you know the thing is, like we don't have the CRs yet here. I'm pretty sure that if we had support for that via plugin or just in the core, and similarly to, you know, when we start adding also a plugin for observability, I'm pretty sure we're gonna find things that or limitations, right, that weren't foreseen in this first version, but that's why we have iterations. So, but
Yeah.
it's a good point. I think, you know, if you're interested in this, George, we can of course, you know, when we have to make some decisions, can pull you in and maybe you can help us with that.
Yeah, great. But I'm asking because if you will fix a plugin API, yeah, so it should be stable. So all proposals should be concerned and agreed on just before you will publish it. Otherwise, it could be a nightmare to revoke it, and we will limit the functions. But in fact, we don't know right now how the user will interact with the system.
Exactly, and that's usually, you know, it's one of our main concerns, and that's why we don't just let everything be controllable in the beginning. Is that we don't want to open control or open the control a certain way, only to realize that that's the wrong way, and then we have to change it. Because when we change it, I don't really love breaking backward compatibility, and so in order to support all that, of course, that's like double up the work. So we have to be careful about that and have many things into consideration. Of course, understanding that we're not going to do like a perfect job all the time, because I think it's just not how software works.
Yeah,
Josh?
Yes, I was just wondering, oh, first, thank you. This looks amazing. Are you going to link to the map views from the other list or detailed views?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, no, but we definitely want to integrate it in other pages too. So for example, like if you go to like a deployment.
And we could do that in a custom plugin fairly easily, I think, if we wanted to do that as well.
Yeah, the map will be, well, eventually available for plugins to display. So you can imagine like integrating it here when it shows all the related resources to this deployment. But as of now, we haven't done any links yet. But yeah, this is something we want to do too.
Yeah, and a plugin would work like you said, but I think this we definitely want this this integration. Like I said, initially that was the plan. Instead of having a big map, we would be like, okay, you see each resource and you can see the map for that resource. But then we thought, okay, this is actually also a nicer way for you to navigate the cluster itself, because it gives you a visual idea of how things are related, right? So instead of having to go table by table, row by row, opening and then seeing, okay, how does this relate? Then you can do the opposite. You can just go and say, hey, I got a couple of namespaces here. I got a deployment here. This has replica sets and pods. Let me zoom in here. I think that's very interesting, but we definitely want the cross linking.
And I assume there will be some indication if there's an error or a warning in one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in that cluster, I don't have it. Let me show you this one.
Or users love this. This is going to be really nice.
So if you have any kind of like warning or error, it will scream at you. Like you can see the icons here. And yeah, we show errors.
Yep. This is this was done in collaboration with the design team, and this is one of the concerns we we had, right? That when you go and you see something here, like it should be very apparent where your attention needs to go. So yeah, that's. I'm happy
You
you
also have a little
liked it.
filter that's like, show me all that's wrong with my cluster right now. It'll just filter that.
Cool.
Great for admins too, like me.
Nice. Nice. Cool. Anyone else has more questions about this feature? If not, then we can move on. By the way, this, like I said, we are planning to release next week. I hate mentioning dates because I always feel like jinxing it. But we really want to have it by next week, and yeah, we're working hard to get that done. So this is one of the features that's going to be there. Yeah, other things coming up. Just very quickly, we have we got Renee and Matthijs that joined in the meanwhile. So just the sake of continuing, other features we got coming up is that, so Ashu last time in the last meeting, Ashu mentioned Ashu demoed a Flux plugin that Ashu has been working on, and this is very close to being released. I actually merged the code today. This has been done with a lot of feedback from folks in the Flux community, which we really appreciate. And yeah, and it's going to be really nice to have that. It's not going to ship with Headlamp, but it's going to be available in the plugin catalog, so you can just choose to install. The other thing that I mentioned is less known is what Santosh here is working on. That's a backstage plugin. So in this case, it's not really a plugin for Headlamp, but it's the opposite. It's like using Headlamp as a plugin inside Backstage, because both projects are similar in a way that they're pluggable user interfaces, but they're complementary as well, right? Because you can, if you're using Backstage as a portal, and you still need a very comprehensive way of looking into the Kubernetes resources from an admin or operations point of view, then it's nice to have Headlamp just there. So you can go from one resource that you're seeing inside Backstage into Headlamp, also rendering inside Backstage, right? Without having to have two separate deployments. And then then we have a plugin that runs inside Headlamp, which is running as a plugin inside Backstage. And what this does is that if you're seeing some resource inside Headlamp, and you want to see it in Backstage, then you got a button. So basically, it's like cross-linking, and we have that also in a very good state. So hopefully we can launch soon. Yeah, and we have other things. So I can share we can quickly go over the release plan. I think it was still the same as last time, but we got a bit more traction on that. Let me share my screen. This one. Okay. I trust you're seeing my screen. Okay. So yeah, so this is the status. We got lots of things that we were able to merge. Of course, bugs always, and yeah, I think this is also the first time we're gonna release with this changes made with React Query. So what this means technically is that before, every time you go into a section, we do some API calls, right? So we fetch all the data for you to see, and then we keep connected to the server via a WebSocket. And then so that means that if you move away and then back, we're going to repeat that work again. Right now, with some changes that Oleg did here, we are using React Query. If you're familiar with that, that's something that allows you to cache some of the calls and to kind of centralize, right? So instead of performing, if you want to list pods in 3 different components, 3 different plugins, something like that, instead of doing 3 times the calls, so one time per place where you need to use it. Now this is going to be basically streamlined into the same place. And by having that cache, also, this means that now when you change from the pods list into something else and then back to the pod list, it's immediate. You see immediate what you were seeing before, because it caches until it, until the connection brings or streams in more results from the server. So this is something that's going to make Headlamp feel much snappier, I think, and and also hopefully reduce the amount of connections. We try to pay attention to that, not having the same connections repeated, but this way we kind of ensure that we do that by default. Yeah, and we're working. So Rene here in the call is working hard on some feature. We still I don't want to compromise and say it's going to be in this release, but if it's not this one, it's the next one. But the idea is to use the cluster in an aggregated way. So you could, we're still doing some tests in terms of performance and stuff. But the idea here is that you can see clusters that are grouped in the same logical group that you as a user create. So you can create like production group, debug group, and then you can go into that. When you go to the pods list, it's the same view, right? When you go into the pods list of that cluster, you're going to see that there's a new column called cluster. So you can list the pods, all the pods in that group, meaning all the pods for each cluster, and you can see which one it belongs to. So yeah, this is a really powerful feature, we feel, for anyone managing more than just a couple of clusters out there. Yeah. Then we got some stuff going on, like also trying to tackle. It's not really a bug per se, but it's like a side effect of how we actually handle the cluster connections. So Headlamp tries to connect to the cluster that you got configured by default all the time. And we realized that initially when we decided to do it, so it was like, okay, you connect, and if it connects, it connects. Doesn't you see the state, but that's it. And it was through a token if you had one configured, or a certificate or stuff. But now I think lots of clouds are using this exact plugin for kubectl, so it actually runs a binary in your machine if you're using the desktop version, of course, and in order to get the token in the background. So if you do that, we realize that, and some people reported, of course, that on Windows you get a terminal popping up. So suddenly you see a terminal, and if you have like 100 clusters, I guess in the same way you could see like 100 terminals popping up, which is not nice. So we're trying to tackle that as well. But like I said, we're trying to also get the release out. So, but yeah, this is what you can expect. Even if a few things drop out, it's not going to be the bulk of it. Any questions about the release?
Is it correct to say that the Flux integration would be available in this release, right?
Would be what?
Flux CD integration.
Would be available, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not that it would be available in this release, is that we want to have it very soon. So basically almost together with the release, but this is a plugin. So even if you don't update, you can still install it.
Okay.
Right. So this is not one of the plugins that we have plugins that we ship with Headlamp. We have plugins that we do not ship. We do not ship open cost, but it's there for users to install, as well as others. We do ship a couple of them, like Prometheus, for example. Flux, we're not shipping that. Even if it's even if we consider it a very important plugin, obviously not everybody uses it. So so you know, we have it there as a possibility. But now it's one click away, so should be easy. Yeah, so we're preparing that release. It's going to be too good. Yep, cool. Let me stop sharing. Yeah, and you know, from my side, that's all I was planning. Do you have any topics you want to discuss? Anything else you remember? We haven't heard from Rene or Mateus here.
I think that team, you are doing a very great job and with a good pace. And from our side, we want to provide as much resources in terms of like testing as possible. But I'd like again to return to two questions. So the question of like a bug. So it could be used like, I don't know, in several scenarios. First scenario, don't show something that is not like installed on cluster, so you can enable a FluxCD plugin by default. And if you don't see like a Flux resources, you can just hide it like with Prometheus, like with any other component. The same with permissions. If user don't have a permission for some resource, like OpenShift way, we are not showing it, and everybody is happy because you don't have a excess number of entities you need to think about. And the same applies for plugins because we discussed a role model. Yeah, so we need to explicitly explain to the core system what permissions are necessary to work with such a plugin. Second very important thing that I was highlighting in our previous conversation is the possibility to use a headlamp for a multi-cluster. I'm right now trying to achieve my goal because we in Ionix we want to have a like single pane for a bunch of clusters, not installing a headlamp on every cluster itself. Yeah, so it could be a multi-cluster system. And I don't have right now any idea how to properly design it. Yeah, because I will hit a wall when I need to pass a proper config files. Because I don't want like to make an additional operator which will go through the all secrets in cluster, collect all kube configs, put them all in one kube config and feed it to Headlamp. And also the question is, what if I want to have a separate RBAC model for this tenant cluster? So I can supply OIDC. Yes, of course, I can make a proper roles inside of it and like segregate. Team A has like 10 clusters, team B has another 10 clusters, and they all can list the whole cluster list, but only access to the proper ones. But I'm not sure how it's aligned with your goals. So should I like write a specification, implement everything on my own with help of my developers, yeah, or we can somehow agree on that it could be useful for other Headlamp users as well, and it will become a part of the core project, not a side one.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer to what may be useful to more users. That would be the users that you know that can answer that, right? I think this is what I tried to convey in our Slack conversation, is that, you know, if it's apparent that many users are interested in this, that's a good reason for us to put it in the core, right? What I'm trying to say is, and of course I'm not trying to make it difficult for you, right? But the thing is, if you have the clusters configured as secrets, right? Is that a common practice or not? It sounds like a useful thing to have, but is that a common practice, or is that something that you decided to do it that way for your company? Other companies may have something else where they describe the clusters in such a batch way, so to say. And that's just for accessing the cluster, right? Then comes the authentication part, and that's where we find different expectations or requests all over, right? Some people are like, you know what, I don't like that you connect with our back. I want to have just one service account for the entire Headlamp, and then I give access to Headlamp. So I don't care about individual users. They all connect through a firewall anyway. So I have them safe. I just want to do that. Yeah, for sure. But if you do that, you have to somehow inject the token or something in the connection. So you have to work a bit like that, even if it's a bit creative, because Headlamp just tries to use RBAC to access. Could we make it simpler? If it's as simple as saying, you know what, here's a service account, use it for everything else. But in order for doing that, we're pretty sure we're not eventually, how should I say it? Eventually leaking that configuration to users. Then I think I would be fine with that, right? But lots of people tell us the third question they ask us about Headlamp is, what is the authentication looking like? And when we say it depends on the user's role, they're like, okay, that's the right approach, right? Because then they don't have to worry about it. Because many are expecting exactly what I said, that you connect with a service account, and they immediately say no, because I want to be able to turn it off for this user who is finishing the contract in 2 weeks, and and that's it. So this sort of granularity is difficult to get into the project in a way that scales and that pleases everybody. So that's why for us, like, we don't really have an opinion on it. Like, we don't say, you know what, we do it like this because Microsoft likes it like that, or we like it like that. We don't have that, right? It's more like, does this make sense for the community, right? The community being Kubernetes users that are interested in Headlamp. If it makes sense for them, then we can add it to the core, and we're happy to to have you contribute that to the core if that's the case. The step in between is there a possibility that we can do that we can let you do that through a plugin? I know that right now the plugins are front-end plugins, we don't have back-end plugins, but we talked about that case a couple of times, and in that would be, let's say that you can add code that the backend consumes, and the backend, and one of that code is a plugin that says, you know what, when you connect, automatically get all the secrets, check if they look like kubeconfigs, set up all the kubectl automatically in the background, so you don't even have to create a controller. You kind of offload that to the backend plugin. I think that's something very interesting, right? And then it will be up to the user to say, I don't want this plugin that these folks created. I want something else, or I want a vanilla case, and that works for everybody. Yeah, but this is this is the case with all the features that we consider to get in. Even the maps thing, even stuff that we do, we always think, okay, should this be a plugin or should this be in the core? And even the map, like I said, was supposed to be a plugin. Then we realize, okay, we can actually add it to the core because it seems useful to navigate. And what we make as plugins is the actual, top layers on top of it that add more information, because maybe you don't want that. Maybe you don't want observability, or maybe you want observability from project A, not project B. So that sort of thing is what should be in plugins. I don't know if this answers your question, George. I'm just saying that it's not that we don't want anything in the core unless it comes from us, right? It's actually the opposite. If it's clear for the community that this is useful and it's something that is used by many, and the use by many only has one concern in my mind, which is, if we are to maintain that, then I want to make sure that it makes sense for everybody and not to maintain it for one or two companies out there, right?
Yes,
So,
I completely agree with you. Thank you very much for your explanation. So what I see right now, first of all, right now we have an approach when Headlamp is targeted to like one user, multiple cluster, use case, right? If it's a desktop application, if we are using it on top of like cloud Kubernetes, on-premise Kubernetes, it's more about like we are installing it with OIDC support, so it multiple user, one cluster. What I want to cover is a multiple users, multiple clusters use case. Yeah, I understand that it could be a little bit tricky. It could be a difficult thing because it could imply some changes in the core, because you probably remember the evolution of operating systems and there were different approaches like Unix approach, Windows approach, and when developers came to the idea that they need to rework it, it created a mass of like clutches, bug fixes, and it was a terrible time when things changed. Yeah, so I need an assistance from your side first of in like management, because I think that the Headlamp community is like large enough to have a different opinions how it should be done, but it would be difficult like for me like a physical person, yeah, to get opinion of community. Does they need it, or like they don't care, or what really goes on? Yeah, and I need some help with the specification. Yeah, because if we don't have a specification, we won't understand what we want to achieve. Yeah, and I think it's the points where we could elaborate and then see how it would be implemented on the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let me
Oh, sorry.
just clarifying one thing quickly, Josh. That you said you want multiple users, multiple clusters in the cloud, right? Or hosted or whatever. And that's, I just want to clarify that that's a possible that's a use case that is possible right now, right? Because even today, I think we had somebody, not today, but yeah, 3 days ago. It's still not reviewed, but we have somebody that opened a PR called support deploying additional Kubernetes manifests to the chart, to the Helm charts, right? So because right now, if you point it to several kubeconfigs, it will show you those clusters in the web, even if it's hosted, right? So you can even combine in cluster, so it gets the configuration from its own cluster that is running on, and then you can supply extra kubeconfigs. I think what you're talking about is not really that feature. What you're talking about is, in my understanding, is how to prepare that feature, how to configure that capability, right? Because you're saying you have those clusters defined as secrets, and you have to go from secrets into a kubeconfig in order for Headlamp to consume it, right? So this is the layer, the only layer that is missing as far as I understand, right?
It's not also this layer, but look, what I worry about that this. So let's say I can write on my own this operator, yeah. So the questions which are like uncovered, hot reload of Headlamp, I will cluster with some name and then remove it and put it again. What will happen on the Y side, because it could be a nightmare with terms of caching. Yeah, so some objects were cached. We remove this cluster. User don't have access to the new one, and what's going on? Yeah. The second thing that I prefer to use kubeconfigs with OIDC, so I need to be sure that the user is passed properly from Headlamp to the backend clusters, yeah, and it would be the same user for the whole set of the cluster. It would be my use case, but if it would be like a kube admin with I don't know, like admin user static one, I won't have proper controls on top of it. So every user that have access to Headlamp would have an admin access to this leaf cluster, and it's not what I really want. I want to have some option to limit the scope, probably some impersonation or something similar.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So it's okay for me to feed the like admin config to Headlamp, yeah, when I will be sure that Headlamp could impersonate this user on the target cluster.
Yeah. I mean, when you have the configuration for a hosted Headlamp, if you have a service account or certificate date or something like that, or token in the kubeconfig, it's true that, yeah, it will consider, okay, this is the one that we have to use. Of course, if you remove that, then by default, Headlamp tries to connect, it fails, and tells the user paste a token. Right. In that case, the user should have a token. So in that case, you support the different roles, even if you're hosting the same cluster, the same set of clusters for everybody out there. Yeah, but if you're talking like, okay, depending on who connects, I want to point them to a different kubeconfig, or I want actually this connection to be impersonated by this role. But if they connect a certain way or to a certain cluster by that role, and you cannot do it through the kubeconfigs, yeah, then you'd have to be creative and inject that into the connection. We have somebody that is working like this, or wanted to inject the tokens by themselves because they were too short-lived. Yeah. Josh, you wanted to say something? I don't know if it was for the
Yeah,
discussion.
the way we solve this is we run Headlamp in each of our clusters, and then we generate a list of clusters and have a cluster chooser option, right? And it just redirects the URL to the other instance.
Yeah,
but for our scale, it's probably much more doable than your scale.
I
yeah.
think it's a viable solution, but again, to be honest, I have some like dream that we would be able to map a multi-cluster connection into Headlamp. So having multiple headlamps each in every cluster is not probably a best solution. So it would work right now, yeah, but in long term, not sure that it's okay.
I wonder if with a front-end plugin, and by the way, we're at time, so but I wonder if with a regular front-end plugin, it doesn't. I don't feel like that's the right way, but it would not be complicated to go and say, hey, here's when you connect, there's only going to be one cluster, or the cluster is called whatever, or has a certain way that you can identify this is the cluster I want to look into. You get the secrets from there, and then you configure that as dynamic for everybody. This would still be per user, so you would have basically repeated clusters. But we added some changes a while ago to make sure that you can have like you can have a shared environment like you're talking about, and each user connects to different clusters, right? And they're not shared. Like if you say like, you know what, this user has access to this namespace, list all the secrets there. They are actually kubeconfigs configured there, and now create clusters out of that dynamically. So you create them dynamically. The user then can redirect to the home view. They're going to see that list. And the fact that that's been configured in the backend that is running in a shared environment does not mean that if you connect with a second person, they're going to see the same, which I understand is what you want, but in this case, they would have to go through the same process, right? So this would work, even though it's basically duplicating the work as I understand your use case.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like I said, I think if you we have several things to to deepen here, and I think one of them is the background plugins, which I think could work this way. The whole the impersonation thing you talked about, I think maybe you can describe that offline if you haven't on Slack, because that one I didn't get exactly what you meant. But like I said, like we want to support your use case as much as we can. As far as adding it to the core, it is in case this makes sense for others, right? Because we don't want to maintain something for one use case, because then if somebody comes, we have to argue like why we don't want to do this for somebody else and all that. But yeah, I think we do want to support everybody one way or another. Rene, you wanna jump in?
Hi. Yeah, hello from Croatia. I just wanted to say also about the blog posts. We were gonna publish that those community guidelines to and ask people if they want to post any blog on any sort of topic or co-write any blog on maybe one of the plugins that some people have made or anything like that. I'd be happy to help either write it and then help have somebody else edit it to check it's okay, or co-write it if anyone wants.
Yeah, good. And it's it's something that we had talked about, and I think it's an interesting way to get things, get the community participating in something that is not just discussions around the code and stuff. This can be even interesting for what we were talking about, George. So if you, for example, have that use case and you mount the headlamp somehow in there, maybe with a controller or some other way, you can call it a POC or something like that. But if you want us to publicize that and get feedback, maybe you want to create a blog post about that, and we can publish it in the headlamp blog. Say this is an external contribution by this person, whatever intro, and then we can have that out there for others to take a look. Maybe someone says, actually we're doing something similar, and we all converge into something that makes sense. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Nice. And likewise, Josh, if you want to contribute some stuff about, how your use cases, I feel like that's something we don't have a lot in the, in our blog, because of course we're the developers, not so much end users in that sense. But and like in the case of Georgia, I feel like I'm surprised with the amount of different ways people actually use or deploy headlamps. So anything like that is is very interesting to put in the blog, and maybe others have a different way of thinking about it, or maybe didn't think about that. So it's helpful.
Also, what about co-writing a specification? Would that happen best on GitHub, or maybe we can, like it's often better to collaborate on Google Docs or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, something more synchronous makes more sense in my opinion, but whatever works for people. Oh, and one thing that I actually forgot to mention that I had a mental note for it. We opened this week this tab on GitHub called Discussions. We didn't do it before because it was like, okay, it's a small community. We had Slack, we had issues, like why we have another way. But we don't have anything yet there. But I feel like that's a good place to go and have everything together with the project's code. There's by default there's even a section called polls, so we can poll people's interests, maybe then ask people on Slack to go there and vote, or whatever. I'm really hoping to make use of that, and I think it ties well with what we're talking about, like launching a discussion on this specification, on this and that use case. I think it's a good place. All right. If that's all, then thank you so much for coming to the meeting, and thanks George for the discussions, and see you all on Slack, and see you next month hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.